Many consider Zack Snyder to be a prime example of a director who emphasizes style over substance in his approach to filmmaking. But as the name of my channel suggests, I would argue that style is substance when it pertains to film. But I also recognize that people's opposition to this claim usually stems from semantics. With exception, people often treat the written context and subtext of a film as the substance, while treating the visual and auditory elements as the style. However, this ignores key components of film as an artistic medium. Film is a unique mode of communication, and the common distinction between style and substance often stems from reductive thinking, which people ought to move away from. The Odessa Steps montage in Battleship Potemkin is one example of visual storytelling that uses its explicit style to convey its political and thematic intentions. This is the style, and this is the substance. This is how all films function, by the way, just some more effectively than others. When people say style over substance when they are talking about film, they generally mean that the film is aesthetically pleasing. However, aesthetics is still substance and can be evaluated just as dialogue can be. Otherwise, the films of Maya Deren would be considered style over substance. Distinguishing the two is an overall short-sighted way to approach film, because style is substance. Now, even though style is substance, it is not necessarily a mark of any inherent quality or lack thereof. So the question here shouldn't be whether Snyder's style outweighs his substance, but rather how effective it is in general. By exploring the opening 11 minutes of Watchmen, this study aims to show that Snyder's aesthetic sensibilities and visual composition holds significant communicative weight. From 1986 to 1987, the 12-issue satirical superhero comic book series Watchmen, written by Alan Moore, was released. In 2009, after years of the project being stuck in a development hell, Zack Snyder's film adaptation hit cinema screens. Now, many are quick to point out the apparent differences between the two texts, arguing that Snyder missed the point of Watchmen almost entirely and externalized the sex and action violence that the comic criticized without a sense of self-awareness. From my understanding, this is not the case. Like Moore, Snyder uses a satirical form of irony unique to his medium to convey the underlying themes of the narrative. Behind the film's unapologetic hyperbole and maximalism, there is still subtlety and introspection to be found. An original literary work and a film adaptation of it are ultimately two separate but related texts. Thus, in order to effectively analyze an adaptation, we should consider what the text says and does that differs from or builds upon the original work, without necessitating the work to adhere to the same exact sensibilities as the original source author. The film as a whole polarizes audiences, but even its detractors tend to express enthusiasm and appreciation for its opening minutes. However, aside from some key shots and references lifted from the comic, the television broadcast, the fight scene, and the credit sequence are from the vision of Zack Snyder and not Alan Moore. Therefore, I feel the opening 11 minutes is a good starting point for an analysis of this film. The film begins in silence, fading from black to yellow. Studio logos appear in flat, two-dimensional motionless form, against the colorful background, as if we were reading a comic book, panel by panel. The camera pulls out from the yellow void, revealing a smiley face button, as the image materializes into a darker, photorealistic, and kinetic world. The button is pinned to the robe of a man preparing tea in the kitchen of a New York apartment. A boiling kettle and John McLaughlin's voice on the television across the room are the first sounds we hear. The contrast of the silent comic book graphics earlier and the sounds and moving images of the verisimilar world creates a dichotomy. We are now being presented with the structural tools exclusive to film, exemplifying the adaptation process by focusing on the distinct differences between the two mediums, comic book and then film.
Wrong as usual. The United States' lack of action in Eastern Europe proves that the Soviet Union's aggression at the Afghan...
This man here is Edward Blake, alias the comedian. McLaughlin speaks about conflict at the Afghan border and the Soviets conducting bomb tests. Blake raises his head and listens in with a look of skepticism, but attention. The film, especially in the opening 11 minutes, focuses on how information is communicated and processed to the viewer, to the watchman, whether it be through television, newspaper, or photographs. We first experience it here, with McLaughlin speaking to viewers through the television set. Blake really pays attention once McLaughlin announces what President Nixon has to say about the Soviets. Before we see the president, we see Blake's reaction to the very thought of him.
President Richard Nixon issued this warning to the Soviets.
The film cuts, not to the president, but to the teleprompter that he reads from. We see the information communicated to him that is about to be communicated to the world. We see the president's men standing by, watching him.
The United States does not start fights.
We see Nixon surrounded by cameras as he places emphasis on the country's strength as a mean to ensure peace.
Let it be clear, we maintain our strength in order to maintain peace.
We get the first close-up of Nixon's face. This is how people see him on television. In the film, Nixon is in his 5th term, and we see this reflected through his old age. The big rhetorical question Nixon leaves the watcher with is,
do the consequences of attacking America outweigh the potential benefits?
This big question foreshadows the plan that character Adrian Veidt, alias Ozymandias, has for global peace. According to him, the consequences of attacking America or the world does not outweigh the benefits. He believes there will be no lasting consequences. However, in order to achieve this vision of a peaceful future, Veidt must lie. Through his deception, the answer to the question people will believe is that threatening America and causing trouble on a global scale does lead to substantial consequences. With superhero Dr. Manhattan destroying major cities, in this case, punishment is the consequence. The television cuts to John McLaughlin, Pat Buchanan, and Eleanor Clift at the TV station. We see the cameras pointed at them, watching them. This is how information is transferred. Then we cut to the watchdog group of nuclear scientists. They move the hand of the Doomsday clock. As McLaughlin states, there is 5 minutes till midnight.
Destruction by nuclear war.
5 minutes. Keep this figure in mind. Blake is shown taking in the information conveyed on his television. Once McLaughlin voices what is prophesied, Blake turns up the volume, despite already knowing what will really happen so long as Veidt succeeds. Next, we see Clift and Buchanan debating on whether the nuclear scientists are predicting the future accurately. Buchanan voices his confidence in America as a superpower, stating that nobody would dare strike America because they have Dr. Manhattan, a superpowered being, on their side. This shows his faith both in his country and in Dr. Manhattan.
What are the chances the Russians will actually attack the United States? Pat Buchanan.
0. The Soviets would never risk going to war. When we have a walking,
nuclear deterrent on our side.
According to Veidt's plan, this is somewhat accurate. The Soviets may at first risk going to war, but once the world witnesses the magnitude of Manhattan's power displayed, they would not dare oppose him. The world instead would enter into an era of peace. In response, McLaughlin asked Clift if Dr. Manhattan's existence would really guarantee world peace.
Well, you're referring, of course, to Dr. Manhattan. But does Dr. Manhattan's existence guarantee world peace? Eleanor Clift.
Scapegoating Dr. Manhattan as a means to succeed, Veidt's answer to this question would be yes. The film, however, suggests the answer to McLaughlin is maybe. The scene cuts to the crew behind the scenes at the television station, time signatures glowing in front of them. They're in physical control of how the information is presented to the public. One worker snaps his finger on the precise moment to change cameras. There is a focus here on watching out for time. Clift states that Dr. Manhattan may actually be the reason behind the Soviets stockpiling nuclear weapons and conducting bomb tests.
It hasn't stopped the Soviet Union from stockpiling record amounts of nuclear weapons.
She states that they may feel threatened by Dr. Manhattan, as does the world.
You don't think it's all just posturing?
Maybe the reason why the Soviets are doing these bomb tests is because they feel threatened by Dr. Manhattan, cornered. Maybe the whole world feels like that.
According to Veidt, Clift is right in her analysis. The world feels threatened by Dr. Manhattan, but this threat will keep them in check and at peace. Blake responds by shaking his head and changing the channel, knowing that in a way, Clift and Buchanan are both wrong and right in their respective assessments. We see MTV airing the classic Moon Man bumper.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Blake wants to get his mind off political matters. Though MTV broadcasts music and entertainment, he is not interested in that sort of distraction. The next channel displays more political news coverage, which Blake is not interested in. Knowing this may be his last few moments alive, Blake changes the channel once again and comes across a commercial that recalls the image of a brighter past.
Unforgettable.
A commercial for Veidt's nostalgia perfume plays. This ad is based off the real-life Chanel No. 5 Share the Fantasy commercial, directed by Ridley Scott.
That's what you are.
I am made of blue sky and golden light, and I will feel this way forever.
Share the fantasy. Chanel No. 5.
The song that plays in the film's fictitious rendering is Unforgettable by Nat King Cole. At this point, the song is diegetic, existing within the world of the film. The perfume in this Channel 6 commercial takes Chanel No. 5's place. The Channel 5 broadcast only reminded Blake of the 5 minutes McLaughlin projected. In contrast, this commercial presents a world that may come as a result, a return to a simpler time, a time in which humanity is nostalgic for.
That's what you are.
The perspective shifts, and the camera creeps up to Blake's apartment door. Veidt is sneaking up to him, as if Predator is pursuing its prey.
Unforgettable.
On the sexually suggestive commercial, an ideal man in a swimsuit approaches a sunbathing woman. Meanwhile, Veidt approaches Blake. This juxtaposition validates a sexual undertone. The models in the commercial are the perfect embodiment of a man and a woman. The man pursues the woman, while Veidt pursues Blake. Blake becomes entranced by the commercial. He realizes in his last moments that even he longs for this image of a simpler time, which will soon be restored, a time where humans will no longer be savage in nature, but a time which he will never live to see.
Like a song.
Veidt, a presumed gay man, breaks down the door of Blake's apartment and trespasses his property, violating what is his. Supporting the underlying homoerotic subtext of the sequence, Blake stands up and looks at Veidt as the lyrics of Love are sung.
Like a song that brings to me how the thought
Just a matter of time, I
does
suppose.
things to me.
We see Veidt obscured in the shadows. This serves as a parallel to the man and woman depicted on the nostalgia commercial.
Just a matter of time, I suppose.
This is the first line heard that is not televised. This shows an emphasis on time, a theme that pervades throughout the entire opening sequence. It was just a matter of time before Blake's demise, and it is only a matter of time that Veidt's vision for peace becomes a reality. Veidt tightens his gloves, preparing for the fight. He stands in the doorway, blocking up the hall. He is positioned similarly to the man on television. His gun is placed on top of the August 1985 issue of Hustler magazine. The cover depicts two naked women kissing one another in a bath. This adds to the underlying sexuality of the situation, and then by extension, the commercial on television. The gun placed on the magazine obscures the US in Hustler, leaving behind what nearly reads as Hitler. Veidt considers Blake to have Nazi-like qualities.
Rorschach's a sociopath, Dan. I mean, so was the comedian. He was practically a Nazi. You know that better than anyone.
The gun being placed in front of the US also shows that Blake's focus is less on his nation and more on exercising power. Blake spills the hot tea before hurling the mug at Veidt's head. He dodges it. The action obscures the song. The mug shatters and breaks the one off Blake's apartment door. Blake grabs the gun, but before he can shoot, Veidt has already moved elsewhere. He predicts his every move and grabs onto the gun. Skipping a few lyrics, the song reprises. The gun fires at the television screen, right as the commercial seemingly comes to an end. We see the brand name Nostalgia appearing on the screen as it cracks like ice. Blake's sense of nostalgia shatters, just like the glass. Throughout the film, glass serves as a motif. While photographs capture a single moment of the past, glass is what preserves it. Just like the bottle of nostalgia perfume advertised in Veidt's commercial, glass is what preserves this sense of nostalgia, but it is prone to shattering. Despite the television breaking, the song continues on, not in the world of the film, but for the audience. Or perhaps the unforgettable song of nostalgia still rings in Blake's ears. Just as the word darling is sung, Blake's body is thrown against the framed pinup of his darling, Sally Jupiter, alias Silk Spectre, and it begins to crack. Veidt disarms Blake. This is the first of several weapons that he could use against him, but instead tosses it aside, allowing Blake to continue fighting, or at least try. He wants to bring Blake to a breaking point. He wants to see him crack. The glass frame of the Silk Spectre pinup completely shatters upon impact with Blake's body. Blake is forced into her image, just as he had forced himself upon her in the past. But by doing so, her pristine image is shattered. In the same way, by violating her, Blake's image of Silk Spectre was shattered in two, the heroic icon he wants to remember, and the frail human reality. It was a sexualized icon of Silk Spectre that Blake desired, but by forcing Silk Spectre down from her pedestal to his bestial level, it was only Sally that remains. He wanted the persona, but this was a construct, something stripped away from her when he took away her choice. The glass encasing Sally shatters. What's behind it is no longer preserved, from the chaos of the world. This framing also draws attention to the similarity between what he did to her in the past and of his current predicament. Just as he shattered her entire life up until that point by violating her, Blake is now the one whose entire perspective of life is being shattered, and he is the one that is being violated. The cynical comedian, laughing at the world's foolish headlong rush into self-destruction, is not present in the room tonight. There is only Blake, who has lost the grip he thought he had on reality. A man skilled and Machiavellian enough to assassinate a president cannot even defend himself. Veidt has thoroughly penetrated his view of reality, and he has no more earthly comfort to which he can cling on to.
I thought I knew how it was. I thought I knew how the world was. I've done some bad things.
He is as outmatched by Veidt's will as much as he is by his physical prowess. Veidt blocks and dodges Blake's every blow and brings him down in the process. Attempting to punch Veidt, Blake breaks through the wall. Contrary to popular misreadings of the film, nobody aside from Dr. Manhattan has superpowers. Though it does show incredible strength for a man well in his 60s, we must consider that the fight sequences are hyperbolized to convey the raw emotions and energy of the situation at hand. This is similar to the wuxia films of China. Snyder's 300 seemingly depicts Spartans with superpowers as well, but that is not actually the case. To some, hyperbolized action may not seem to fit the source material. However, Snyder seems to argue otherwise. The comic subverts the expectations of the reader by deconstructing the medium's conventions. This is what Snyder is doing with Watchmen. Many see superhero films for the action and violence. This film gives the viewer just that, while simultaneously punishing them by taking it to an uncomfortable extreme. Additionally, the characters also live out a power fantasy, and the film externalizes this through exaggeration. Although, the action still operates in some level of plausibility. Blake is a man who has been in action for 45 years, as a masked hero, a soldier, and a government agent. It is very possible for him to exhibit such a display of power, especially during an adrenaline rush. Veidt pulls Blake and slams him into a glass table, and then lifts his body up. As he is thrown across the room, their perspective shifts to the outside of the apartment window, as if to frame what's inside, like a picture behind glass. Blake crashes into another glass table. He gets up once again, scratched and bleeding. He grabs a knife and flings it at Veidt. After he quickly dodges it, the knife hits the Sally pinup. Blake grabs a cleaver, only for Veidt to catch it midair. He drives it into the ground again, indirectly asking of Blake to resort to hand-to-hand combat. Instead, Blake grabs another knife and attempts to stab him without any success. Veidt manages to deliver a few hits, and then finally disarms him by crushing his hand. Veidt strips away Blake's manhood, as these weapons serve as tools to demonstrate masculinity and dominance. As soon as the lyrics continue, Veidt gives Blake a chance to speak. Blake laughs and says,
"It's a joke. It's all a joke."
Blood drips from his mouth and down onto his button. The lyrics "Forevermore" plays in contrast with the circumstances. The image of the blood-stained smiley face button foreshadows Veidt's dependence on the blood of millions to preserve his utopian vision of peace and happiness. Blake utters, which reveals the deep regret he has in the life of his that will soon come to an end. It could also indicate a sudden religious cry to God.
God help us all.
Medic!
Remaining still, Veidt lets him speak during a brief moment of silence. The camera holds on this moment between action longer than needed, but this moment does not stay intact. The silence is broken when Veidt head slams Blake into his counter. Veidt watches Blake struggle, knowing that he cannot fight any longer. He picks his body up and off the ground and defenestrates him.
So unforgettable.
The glass shatters. The glass that framed Blake's world cracks apart. As Blake falls from the building up high, his bloodied button dominates the screen. Precisely 5 minutes after the first time it was shown. 5 minutes until midnight. The next step in Veidt's plan to ensure world peace has been completed. We see the button fall, just as Blake fell. His corpse bleeds on the pavement. It is raining shards of glass. He is gone, as are his memories, his nostalgia. The music fades. We hear sirens in the distance. The button spins on the bloody concrete. After it ceases, camera enters through the eye of the smiley face, where the next sequence begins. Through the eyes of an innocent face, we witness memories of a simpler time. From the darkness, we see a flash of light. Bob Dylan's The Times They Are a-Changin' plays. We are treated to a series of slow-motion shots depicting key moments in American history, but altered by the presence of superheroes. Bright yellow credits grace the screen, angled against the surrounding environment, assuming a position in the world of the film, thus blurring the diegetic lines. We see the image of a simpler time that Edward Blake longs for, a time where masked vigilantes became cultural icons glorified by the media. But we see what becomes of this image as the times change. Through the corruption of sex and power, the social ramifications of superheroes prove too much, and the public turns against them. The times change before our eyes, from brighter to darker, from the rise to the fall of superheroes. A man takes a photograph. A costume vigilante punches an armed criminal, and blood sprays from his mouth. Much like the earliest of superhero comics from which this image is based, the violence here is grounded in a sort of stylized reality. The man punching him is Hollis Mason, alias the first Nite-Owl. Fed up with the police's lack of proper action, Mason pursues crime fighting.
So, a few of us cops, we get together and we figure, what the heck? We'll mask up too. We'll finish what the law couldn't.
This event shows Hollis Mason playing the criminal's game by donning a mask. Despite the obvious danger at hand, the cameraman takes the shot, right in the middle of the action. Upon inspection, we can see several Batman comics plastered on the wall. Both this and Nite-Owl's costume design suggest that it was comic book heroes like Batman and Robin that inspired Hollis Mason and others to pursue crime fighting. Look close enough and we can see that this is Gotham Opera House. This is where a young Bruce Wayne witnessed the death of his parents and led him to grow up and fight crime as Batman. In the background, we see wealthy individuals as witnesses. There is a good chance that this is meant to be Thomas and Martha Wayne, Bruce's parents. Martha can be identified by her pearl necklace. The man in the back left corner may be their butler, Alfred. Notably missing from the scene is Bruce. It seems that by exacting justice in the real world and saving the Waynes, Nite-Owl ensures that Batman remains a character of fiction. The Batman comics on the wall supports this thematically, but contradicts it logically. The suggestion here is that the scene is completely staged for the purpose of the camera, within the very world of the film. This could serve as a mere meta-narrative paradox, hinting at a sense of self-awareness and satirical criticism, or it might reflect the superficial nature of superheroes, but more importantly, that there was a need to glorify them in the first half of the 20th century in order to displace the role of masked gangsters in the media. Superhero comic books serve this purpose in the real world, just as masked heroes do within the world of the film. This is another example of symbolic hyperbole. Again, the style here is the substance. Heroes like Hollis Mason come from different places to fight crime as real-life superheroes. While the others may be driven by sex, power, and mental insanity, Nite-Owl appears to be the one honest superhero. Moving forward, the shots progress to reveal a deeper and darker world, but it starts here. All from different backgrounds, the costumed heroes gather round.
Come gather round, people, wherever you roam.
Here we see Sally Jupiter, or the first Silk Spectre, posing for the camera. The New York police force surrounds her with the ambivalent mixture of restrained lust and disdain. Her manager and future husband stands behind them. During World War II, many women entered the workforce, causing intimidation and paranoia in the men after they returned home. The fears that plagued men at the time are manifested here, as Jupiter enters a man's field, crime fighting, and does it better than them, while embracing her female sexuality. Not only does this image depict the allegiance between costumed heroes and the police, but also media sensationalism. The newspaper Silk Spectre holds makes a cultural spectacle out of her impact on crime. The headlines read, "Criminal World Goes Gaga Over Silk Spectre," which frames her deeds as acceptable and good, while also hinting at a sort of cultural sexualization of her image. Costumed heroes become a social fad of sorts, and Silk Spectre becomes a celebrity icon and a sex symbol, in a similar vein to Marilyn Monroe. The policemen fawn over her as she smiles. At least one of them even seems to look down her blouse. Despite this, she expresses pride and a sense of empowerment. Though the police express interest in her body in fragmented parts, the camera focuses on her whole. She is more than capable of maintaining her dignified persona in this male-dominated society. The embrace of her sexuality is just one way she empowers and affirms her overall identity, despite allowing the male gaze to be relatively welcomed during this time in her life. These are Sally Jupiter's glory days, before the image of herself was fragmented. It is the time she is nostalgic for, and through her daughter, she tries saving.
If your time to you is worth saving.
Here we see Edward Blake, or the comedian, during his youth, smiling for the camera as he holds a bank robber in an arm lock. It was only minutes ago that we witnessed the same man's assassination. But here, Blake is young and cheerful as he begins his crime-fighting career. In the comic, the character was just 16 years old at this point, but he was aged up by 6 years in order for Jeffrey Dean Morgan to play him throughout the span of his life. While there would be a thematic weight to have Blake as a teenager, it is ultimately more powerful for the screen to see the same face throughout the years. As the comedian confiscates the money from the robber, his gun goes off, adding the rhythmic sound of bullets to Bob Dylan's song. The cameraman places himself in danger, showing the public's dangerous obsession with the black and white framing of the heroic avenger and the bad guys they take down. The robber dons a mask and a striped shirt, the classic embodiment of the criminal. With the comedian's colorful costume, he is meant to be the hero. That's surely how the public and media frame him. But as the film progresses, we witness the moral repugnance of his character.
Không.
Play.
Đừng nghĩ kìa em.
Don't.
Con của
She was pregnant. And you gunned her down.
That's right.
The simplistic image of good and evil begins to change with the times.
For the times they are a-Changin.
In this shot, we see several costumed heroes posing for the camera. The cameraman here is meant to be Ouija, an Austrian photojournalist who resided in New York. The group dons colorful costumes, which reflects the image of a seemingly simpler time. The characters pose with a sense of happiness and pride. From left to right stand Silhouette, Mothman, Dollar Bill, Captain Metropolis, Nite-Owl, Silk Spectre, and Hooded Justice. On the floor kneels the comedian. As indicated by the banner in the background, the year is 1940, and this team is the Minutemen. This group photo of the Minutemen of the past foreshadow a similar image of the Watchmen of the present. This is further suggested as the title Watchmen appears on the bottom of the screen, just as the banner reading Minutemen appears on the top. They smile with hope for a better tomorrow, which never actually comes. As time unfolds, the future is prophesied.
Some writers and critics who prophesize with your pen.
The camera flashes precisely 5 minutes after Doomsday was prophesied, as mentioned by McLaughlin. The superficial image of camaraderie preserved by the photograph forms a link between mass murder through nuclear war in the distant future and Blake's attempted rape that occurs directly after the photo was taken. He became a parody of savage human nature. The flash of the photograph is analogous to the flash of the bomb. The rest of the Minutemen aren't completely innocent either. Increasingly unrestrained sexuality dominates the mindsets of his peers, and public perception of them as well, which only becomes exemplified as the opening credits and the film as a whole progresses.
Mother, this is gross. Well, I think it's kind of flattering.
You gotta have some kind of reason for dressing in an outfit like this.
Through his own twisted sense of morality, the comedian becomes the first to call out this sexual inclination, while also being the utmost example of it himself.
This is what you like. This is what makes you hot. What?
Silk Spectre's reason is not that she is sexually unsatisfied and wants a real man like Blake, but that she likes the feeling of having power over men through sexual charm. This moment reflects the sexual thoughts of the superheroes and the subtle fetishization of them by the public. And despite the darkness that follows this moment, the photograph holds positive significance to the Minutemen. In all its darkness, the past maintains a sense of glory and nostalgia.
Every day, the future looks a little bit darker. But the past, even the grimy parts of it, keep on getting brighter.
Eyes wide, the chance won't come again.
Here we see a B-29 bomber flying into the view of the camera, directly after dropping the atomic bomb on Japan. The camera follows the bomber, instead of focusing on the explosion in the background. The camera pans over to reveal a patriotic image of Silk Spectre on the side of the aircraft. The explosion in the background can be easily missed because of how the bomber is framed in the shot, but a careful eye will take notice of what's actually going on.
And keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again.
This is a classic example of how a director's style is also their substance. The stylistic choices in the shot have inherent substantive implications. By focusing on the aircraft rather than the impact of the bombing, the film shows where the American sensibilities lie. This is framed as a heroic feat. The impact that the bombing has on Japan is only peripheral. The bomber is romanticized as the victor, which is complemented by the heroic icon of Silk Spectre. In the film, the bomber is named Miss Jupiter rather than Enola Gay. In a way, it is the superhero that drops the bomb. Through this image of American heroism, the superheroes win the day and establish peace through the bomb, at the cost of thousands of deaths. But these deaths are off-screen. Ultimately, peace and victory are all that really matters to America. This foreshadows Veidt's master plan. Both here and at the end of the film, the image of a superhero drops a bomb on a major city.
What do you mean you did this?
Not directly. It was made to look like I did it.
And many lives are sacrificed in order to save many more.
killing millions.
To save billions. A necessary crime.
In both instances, the carnage is not shown, because that is not the focus. Next, we see New Yorkers in Times Square during VJ Day. America celebrates Japan's surrender following the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By celebrating this victory, they implicitly celebrate mass murder. Foreshadowing the ending, peace comes from atrocity. Japan lost the war, and the United States won.
Was the loser now will be later to win.
As Silhouette walks through the crowd, she grabs a nurse and kisses her, which is then photographed. The picture taken here mirrors the famous VJ Day photographs by Alfred Eisenstadt and Victor Jorgensen. The obvious difference here is that the lesbian vigilante takes the place of the sailor. In this alternate timeline, superheroes begin altering historical events. This is the land of opportunity, and she uses this victory as an opportunity to normalize homosexuality at the expense of disgusting the public. The superheroes do as they please, rejecting the political norms of the time in order to redefine the future.
For the times they are a-Changin.
Here we see the mortality of the superhero as cameramen photographed the aftermath of Dollar Bill's murder. He was gunned down by criminals after his cape trapped him in a revolving door.
Don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall.
This superhero is not bulletproof. He is just a man, and it is his life choices that led to his downfall. Photographers gather around him, snapping pictures, sensationalizing the man's death for the public, just as they sensationalized the escapades that led him to this place. Here we see the retirement of Sally Jupiter. Surrounding her is the remaining members of the Minutemen. Despite his peers knowing full well that he attempted to rape Sally, the comedian is not excluded from the group. He is even allowed to sit beside her at the dinner table. Sally has begun to move on from the hurt he has caused her.
Oh, he that gets hurt will be he who has stalled.
The photograph is staged similarly to Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. By embodying the roles of religious figures, the hero's sense of moral superiority and importance becomes even more inflated. A pregnant Sally is positioned in the middle, taking Jesus' place, as this is her Last Supper with the other Minutemen. The virgin birth of Jesus Christ is a miracle. According to Dr. Manhattan, so too is the birth of Laurie, with whom Sally is carrying.
Your mother loves a man. Edward Blake, the comedian, the man she has every reason to hate, and out of that contradiction against unfathomable odds, it's you. Only you that emerged a miracle.
The film equates Jesus with the Mary-like image of Sally, but more importantly, with Laurie inside her womb. As we later discover, Blake is the true father of the child. He is positioned just as Judas is in Da Vinci's painting. Following the Last Supper, Judas betrayed Jesus. Likewise, through his attempt of rape, Blake betrayed Sally. To her right is her husband, who takes on the role of Thomas, who doubted Jesus. We see through Laurie's flashbacks that he argues with Sally. Noticing the obvious affection she has shown to the comedian, he may already be doubting who the father of the child is. Outside the comfort of her womb, there's a battle of sexual tension.
The battle outside raging.
To Sally's left is her sexual aggressor and father of her child. To her right is her husband, as well as another man who seems to be infatuated with her. On opposite ends of the table sit a lesbian couple and a possibly gay couple. Hooded Justice has moved away from Sally and is now touching the face of Captain Metropolis. Silhouette remains in a lesbian relationship with the nurse seen earlier. Mothman is the odd man out, and seems to be acting independently from sexual gain. In this respect, he mirrors the character Rorschach, and almost acts as an original version of him. Exclusive to the film are the designs of his wings, which form a Rorschach-like pattern. The similarities are further supported by the next shot. It is here that we see the public beginning to turn on superheroes. Mothman is dragged away against his will to be hospitalized, as he is deemed mentally ill. Just like Rorschach, he refuses hospitalization.
Rotting society, what it calls rehabilitation. Nothing short of compromise.
Is it a compromise to want to make you well?
A man awaits him with a straitjacket. Girls in the background witness this sight, but an officer urges them not to interfere. The superhero is now seen as a potential danger to others. The hospital arrest, naturally, is sensationalized by the media, as this moment of time is preserved through photography. In the next shot, we see the media continuing to sensationalize the lives and deaths of superheroes. Silhouette and her girlfriend were shot dead. In a similar fashion to a shot in David Fincher's Seven, the blood of the lesbian lovers is used to write a message on the wall. On their bed lays a blood-soaked newspaper. From its headlines, we learn Silhouette has been outed from the Minutemen, following a supposed sex scandal. The Minutemen knew she had a lesbian relationship for some time, but decided to kick her out once the public framed it as a scandal. She was not even the only gay member of Minutemen. While the comedian got away with attempted rape, Silhouette was outed for her consensual relationship. Not only did this make newspaper headlines, but it also led to a homophobic hate crime, likely to then make newspaper headlines once again. The two die in each other's arms, victims of a violent, reactionary society that chooses to criticize rather than understand them.
And don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command.
Here we see a young Walter Kovacs. He is disgusted by the working class. Men take turns paying his prostitute mother for her services. It is important to note the careful choice of editing at display. Just in a matter of seconds, a political message is conveyed. Silhouette and her girlfriend are fired and murdered for their sexual orientation. Despite being in a committed, romantic relationship, society paints them as scandalous lesbian whores, deserving hatred and ridicule. Meanwhile, society simultaneously endorses literal prostitutes, like Kovacs' mother in secret. This societal double standard is expressed through the subtle sophistication in the editing of the sequence. While he remains still, Kovacs is disgusted by his mother's clients. One client gets up, just as the previous one leaves. As Kovacs looks towards the men, there is fire in his eyes. He wears a black and white striped shirt, foreshadowing his future identity as Rorschach. Before long, he will no longer tolerate what he perceives to be the sins of man.
Oh, the times they are a-Changin.
There is more going on here as well. The shot opens with a man reading a newspaper, one that states Russia has an atomic bomb that will be ready for testing in 16 weeks. The headlines are alarming. It is only a matter of time. The old way is no more.
Your old road is rapidly aging.
However, the man puts the newspaper down once it is his turn for sex. This is a recurring theme throughout Watchmen. There is an overwhelming sense of nuclear hysteria, but characters are willing to set that aside for sex. It may be the only way to cope. In fact, coupling is coping. Here we see the two most powerful people in America shaking hands, President John F. Kennedy and the first true superhuman, Dr. Manhattan, formerly known as John Osterman. In this scene, on one side, we see JFK's guards and family, including Jackie Kennedy and their children. On the other side, we see Manhattan's family of scientists, including his friend Wally Weaver. Naturally, they are surrounded by many cameramen who are photographing the event. This long, slightly awkward handshake establishes a friendship between man and Superman, and a union of politics and science.
The Superman exists, and he is American.
With a superpowered being on America's side, the country's image of national security becomes stronger. Furthermore, this highlights the fact that JFK, often praised as a peacemaker, took office by stressing militarization to ensure national security, against Eisenhower's warnings of a growing military-industrial complex, in which the media was also seen as complicit. Dr. Manhattan's influence is reflected through a perspective shift. The following shots reject the pre-established chronological sequence of events, and instead skip back and forth non-linearly, just as Manhattan sees his past, present, and future simultaneously. In this shot, we see a seemingly faithful recreation of the JFK assassination. Abraham Zapruder is even seen filming it. Kennedy is shot dead.
The line it is drawn, the curse it is cast,
shocking the nation and making history.
As the present now will later be past.
Despite the superhero's influence on the world, the film suggests that some tragedies are inevitable. The camera follows the car before panning over to reveal that Edward Blake was responsible, or at least complicit, in the assassination. There are many mysteries surrounding JFK's death that remain unsolved to this day. Different theories suggest differing locations of fire, different number of gunmen, and different number of shots. While the Clark panel stated Kennedy was hit by 2 bullets, many speculate there was only 1 bullet, while many witnesses claim to have heard 3. In this brief moment, the film offers its own version of the event. Here 2 shots are definitely fired, though the last shot may have been fired from Blake, providing a new addition to this reality. Furthermore, a case can be made that 3 shots are fired. The first shot is either quickly followed by a second, or it is an echo of the first that is heard. However, the last shot is not followed by such an echo. Here the impact of the first shot is obscured by Zapruder, although we definitely see the fatal headshot. This suggests that the shot was fired from the direction of the grassy knoll by Edward Blake. Blake puffs his cigar before he leaves, referencing some witnesses' reports of seeing smoke coming from the grassy knoll. While he may be a man to take action into his own hands, he also takes jobs from the government, perhaps hinting at a grander conspiracy. Kennedy naively thought he could come to a compromise with the military-industrial complex, promoting it for his own ends, but rejecting the depths of human savagery, which are its inevitable consequences. Hence, he is shot down by the comedian, perhaps on the payroll of the Pentagon, or the industrialist it subsidizes. Or perhaps simply because Blake, in his cynicism, wants to expose the societal and self-delusion that underline Kennedy's charismatic authority. But without any conspiracy believed at a mass scale, whether true or false, a distrust in the government forms, and the order of things rapidly fade.
The order is rapidly fading.
In this shot, we see Sally's daughter, Laurie, at a young age. She witnesses her parents arguing with one another about the past. The camera glides across the room to reveal Sally's costume and memorabilia from the old days. Photographs and newspapers capture an idealistic and romanticized past during Sally's years of crime fighting. But now she only fights with her husband.
It's not my fault you got old. What do you have to complain about? I'm putting food on the table for you and your child. Why don't you call your friend Eddie? Maybe he can give you a better life. Guy tries to rape you, and years later you let him finish the job. What? Were you drunk or just lonely?
Am I ever gonna live this down?
Children can no longer trust former figures of authority, whether they are heroes or their parents. The times have changed.
Oh, the times, they are a-Changin'.
We also see Laurie's snow globe resting on the television. The snow globe plays a larger role in the comic, serving as a catalyst to Laurie's repressed memories. On the television, we see faithfully recreated footage of the Buddhist monk Tuc Wing Duc burning himself alive to protest to the violence and oppression in Vietnam, as stated by the television commentator.
An act clearly to send the signal to the government in Saigon that violence and oppression is not the way to peace. Reaction.
Ironically, according to Veidt's plan, it is violence and oppression that does lead to peace.
By exposing me, you would sacrifice the peace so many died for today.
Peace based on a lie.
But peace, nonetheless.
The television program occurs out of view of the characters, perhaps suggesting that they do not listen to this message, but the message is still there, nevertheless. Here we see officers flash their lights on the bruised faces of two unconscious criminals that are roped to a fire hydrant. Mirrored on opposite sides, they form a symmetrical pattern, the same pattern that is then found on the calling card below, though it could also be interpreted as an R for Rorschach. Kovacs has grown from his childhood trauma and has left the hurt behind him in order to exact justice, or at least his perception of it.
Oh, he that gets hurt will be he who has stalled.
Rorschach leaves the men behind for the police. He uses violent tactics to achieve peace, and this is back when he still let the criminals live.
I was young then, too soft on criminals. I let them live.
Important to note is that this shot does not actually feature Rorschach. Past superheroes have been photographed by the media, but Rorschach stays outside the limelight. Fame and fortune do not matter to Rorschach, only justice.
Justice matters.
And the wish to evoke fear in his enemies.
The man turned, and there was something rewarding in his eyes. Sometimes the night is generous to me.
Here we see Fidel Castro and Lenin Brezhnev. They are at Lenin's mausoleum in Kremlin as they oversee a military parade. Planes fly overhead. Ground vehicles transport weapons of war. They are reviewing the military parade across Red Square. As they prepare the Cuban missiles, they prepare for war.
The battle outside raging will soon shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are a-Changin.
In this scene, we see a loose recreation and subversion of the photograph Flower Power. In Bernie Boston's 1967 photo, a young man protests the Vietnam War by placing a carnation into the rifle that is pointed at him. Here it is instead a young woman, and she dons a painted happy face flower on her cheek. However, in the film, the military police take further action, firing upon the protesters. In this timeline, the military police turn on the people they are meant to protect, perhaps taking inspiration from the violent and aggressive costumed heroes. The beautiful flower explodes, and the ideal of peace crumbles. While the protesters do curse at the police, they do not turn to physical violence, yet they are gunned down anyway, simply for standing up for something that they personally believe in.
Don't criticize what you can't understand.
However, this overtly violent behavior is based on historical truths. The American police force and military alike have an extended history of corruption and abuse of power that carries on to this day. The scene in particular has real-world parallels to the Kent State shootings in 1970, in which unarmed protesters of Richard Nixon were gunned down by the Ohio National Guard, which this shot may be depicting, as indicated by the protester signs. Here the militant violently suppress the peaceful, further corrupting and contorting the image of what is good and what is bad. This is true for police in the US today. Many people who are granted such positions of power also abuse them. They exercise their undeserved power on innocent and oppressed others. In response, tension only grows, and the next generation becomes less and less likely to listen to the commands of authority that they increasingly regard as arbitrary.
Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command.
In this shot, we see how superheroes have made their way into the art scene. Photographers gather around artist Andy Warhol as he showcases his series of superhero paintings at a pop art exhibit. Warhol is accompanied by writer Truman Capote, whom he was fascinated with. The art on display mirrors the shot Maryland's. In place of Monroe is a second Nite-Owl, and in the background we can also see some art of Ozymandias and Rorschach. Andy Warhol's art often focused on celebrity culture and mass media. In this timeline, the last few decades saw the costumed heroes as celebrities, with their likenesses being iconic in the pop culture. Warhol's focus on superheroes is based in reality as well. He was a big fan of Batman comics, and in 1964, he even directed his own art film titled Batman Dracula, which was screened at exhibits. Art reflects reality, and reality reflects art. As art changes, society also changes. In this case, as society sees a new movement in art, it also sees a new wave of superheroes, which is then depicted in the art. The images of the Minutemen are now a relic of the past, and culture embraces these new icons.
Your old road is rapidly aging.
As the camera pulls back, we see a naked person walk by. This could be a reference to the nude artwork Warhol had done in the past, or it could serve as yet another reference to the sexually fueled landscape of American culture, especially in relation to superheroes, which we have seen throughout this title sequence, depicting the changing times.
Oh, the times they are a-Changin'.
After one small step for Manhattan and one giant leap for mankind, we see Neil Armstrong standing on the surface of the moon, having planted the American flag. Accompanied by him is Dr. Manhattan, who captures the historical achievement on camera. Through the aid of the superhero, America has made history. Armstrong utters the words, "Good luck, Mr. Gorski," which references an urban legend in which Armstrong's supposed neighbor, Mrs. Gorski, told her husband the next time she'd give him oral sex would be when the neighbor kid walks on the moon. This reference not only adds more sexual subtext to the title sequence, but also validates an urban legend. Numerous conspiracy theories surround the Apollo 11 moon landing, and while the film does not explicitly legitimize any of them, the alternative history brings even more questions to the table. We know that Dr. Manhattan has the ability to teleport across the solar system.
I have walked across the surface of the sun.
So going to the moon is an easy feat for him. It is even possible that he simply teleported Neil Armstrong there, ending the space race with a single gesture. Though we see part of the lunar space module, Eagle, meaning that the astronauts did land on the moon on their own. Perhaps this indicates that Dr. Manhattan's presence is irrelevant to the outcome of the seemingly fair space race, and is just there for the camera, though the public may question if the actual mission getting to the moon was staged, as Dr. Manhattan simply could have brought them there. The film as a whole revolves around conspiracies, so this is quite possible. Kennedy won a very close election against Nixon in 1960, partly because of the public fear of the Soviet Union's capacity to spy on the United States after the launch of Sputnik. By committing the country to landing on the moon before the end of the decade, he sought to combat these fears through covert suggestion of the superior power of the United States. Therefore, Dr. Manhattan must be present on the moon, because the agreement Kennedy made with the military-industrial complex to win the election, represented in the previous handshake between the two, was kept by his successors. Here we see our first good look at Adrian Veidt, alias Ozymandias, posing cross-armed for the cameras at Studio 54, and surrounds himself with the likes of the Village People, Mick Jagger, and David Bowie as Ziggy Stardust. While his cross-armed stance implies a sense of watchful superiority over the people around him, we also see him unmasked, showing his face as he is one with the people.
Come gather round, people, wherever you roam.
While the comic may reference and critique other superhero comics, it is fitting for the film adaptation to reference and critique other superhero films. Ozymandias' costume has considerable differences from the comic, but that is because it is more in line with costumes from 90s superhero movies. There are similarities to the costumes seen in Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. His costume even features accented nipples, like the suits in Batman and Robin. But it goes beyond a reference for reference's sake. Ancient Greek statues were used as models for the costumes in Batman and Robin because they displayed perfect male bodies. Veidt projects the image of a perfect man. The emphasized male figure is possibly an indicator of homoeroticism, something hinted at throughout the film. Veidt also turns to ancient figures as a source of inspiration, including Alexander the Great.
The only person with whom I felt any kinship died 300 years before the birth of Christ. Alexander of Macedonia, or Alexander the Great, as you know him.
And like the historical figures that he looks up to, he too has a grand vision for the future.
His vision of a united world was, well, it was unprecedented. I needed to match his accomplishments. And so I resolved to apply antiquity's teachings to our world today. And so began my path to conquest. Conquest not of men, but of the evils that beset them.
Though for him, in order to achieve that vision for peace and to save humanity, he must sacrifice the people around him.
And admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone.
The new superhero group Watchmen is formed. From left to right stand the comedian Laurie, the second Silk Spectre, Dr. Manhattan, Ozymandias, Dan Dreiberg, the second Nite-Owl, and then Rorschach. A photograph is taken in order to save this moment of time.
If your time to you is worth saving.
This mirrors a Minutemen photograph taken towards the beginning of the title sequence. The image of the present may mimic what has come before, but these images of the past are ultimately behind these heroes, figuratively and literally. Reflecting the darker times they exist in, the appearances of the heroes are less colorful than those of the Minutemen, save for Dr. Manhattan, who, at the end of the film, may indirectly restore an era of peace and happiness. This is a change from the comic. Ozymandias wore bright purple and gold, and the second Silk Spectre wore much more yellow than black. There was never a team called Watchmen either. It was Crime Busters, and they were accompanied by Captain Metropolis, still donning his bright red costume. The darker costumes in the film parallels the history of on-screen superhero costumes. Early superhero films featured bright and colorful costumes, while later films featured darker and grimmer ones. The second Nite-Owl's costume is a departure from the source material, and seems to have similarities between the Batman costumes featured in both Tim Burton and Christopher Nolan's Batman films. Like several others, this shot has an underlying level of sexual subtext. At this point, Dr. Manhattan is growing tired of his girlfriend and becomes infatuated with the teenage Silk Spectre.
I am in a room full of people wearing disguises. A very young girl looks at me and smiles. She's beautiful.
Nite-Owl also seems to have a crush on her. There's also a bit of sexual tension between her and her father.
You're the comedian, right? You're pretty cool in there.
You know your mom, she was one of the all-time champion beauties. You got her eyes, you know. You even have that same funny little mole.
Ozymandias and Rorschach, in contrast, focus on the larger picture.
With a group this size, it seems like a publicity stunt. Not in it for the ink.
We can do so much more. We can save this world.
It is Nite-Owl that takes the photo, rather than the public. This suggests that the public no longer wishes to sensationalize and idealize the image of superheroes, so the superheroes insist on doing it themselves, elevating their sense of self-grandeur and importance to society, just as many police do in America today. There is also a focus of power here. In the film, the superheroes self-identify as the Watchmen.
Watchmen. That's the real joke.
They feel they have the right to watch over the public, assert their own sense of moral superiority, and take the law into their own hands through violence. While with the exception of Dr. Manhattan, the only thing that separates the Watchmen from anyone else, just like police, is a social position they assert onto the public. And it is this social position and attitude that leads the public to turn on them. While at one point of time they may feel content and at peace with the social structure, the times change.
Oh, the times they are a-Changin.
In the final shot of the title sequence, we see the public responding to the news of the third-term election of President Richard Nixon, as well as the state of the superheroes. Nixon's re-election is communicated through a television screen. He is cheering, congratulating himself, showing his egocentrism. But the public couldn't be any less enthusiastic. The other television screen confirms that the presidential term limits have been repealed, and an act is being pushed to outlaw vigilantes, while the Doomsday clock moves closer to midnight. The camera pulls back to reveal a layer of glass, symbolizing the separation of the government and the public, as well as the encasing of the image of this historical moment. The celebration is juxtaposed with the commotion of the protesters. A man spray paints the phrase, "Who watches the Watchmen?" against the glass. The public has turned against the government, as well as the superheroes that are meant to protect them. Many of the protesters hold up signs, fighting against the legality of masked heroes. It was only some decades ago that the public embraced the Minutemen, celebrating them taking action. But now with so much power in their hands, society has shifted, and the public has turned on them.
You are not the law! We want regular cops! No more vigilantes! My son's a police officer, you fucking faggot!
They want their police back. The same police who were bested by the heroes some time ago. The same violent and corrupt police force who abuse power. Because to the public, yes, the police are terrible. But these alleged heroes, these watchmen, are even worse. The nation is too powerful as well, and the people fear nuclear war. The times have changed, and have changed for the worse. They long for the image of the past that nostalgia brings, but it might already be too late. They fight against these alleged heroes. They want justice against those who are meant to exact it. A man throws a bottle bomb at the window in protest. The glass shatters, as does their nostalgia.
We're society's only protection.
From what?
Are you kidding me? From themselves.
The image of the past burns, up in flames. Throughout this study, we have explored how Zack Snyder uses his stylistic visual composition and directorial artistry to convey particular thematic ideas, including political progression, nostalgia, power play, time, sexuality, and sensationalism. These ideas are subtly encoded in the very text of the film, and are expressed through Snyder's sensibilities of semi-ironic maximalism. To reiterate, I argue that Zack Snyder does have a proper understanding of Watchmen, and he chose to adapt it in his own style, in his own substance. At least, that is how I see it. Tell me, what do you see?
There are endless musical sections which seem to be positive. We get a little bit of Hendrix, we get a little bit of Simon and Garfunkel. We get a kind of montage sequence which throws together elements of pop culture, and it looks very impressive. But when you start picking it apart, you go, yes, but what does it all actually add up to? And the answer is not very much.
And don't criticize what you can't understand.